On this first day of a new year, I invite you to consider just how far does our compassion reach. In early September, just hours after the 6 murdered hostages who had been held in Gaza for over 300 days were buried in Israel, I officiated at a funeral in Pittsburgh. The juxtaposition of the funerals, one of a beloved uncle and brother, someone I knew, and the other for 6 victims of terror who I did not know personally, but who were Jews and Israelis. The juxtaposition of these funerals compellingly illustrated for me what we mean when we say at the end of every funeral, Hamakom yenachem etchem b'toch shar avlei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. May God comfort you together with all mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. I have affiliated at hundreds of funerals in my 35 years as a rabbi, and you might be surprised to hear that almost every time I worry that those words are not a comfort in the way that they were meant to be. Although I specify that these exact words have been shared with generations of Jews who stood by the graves of loved ones, just as we do right now, I'm never sure of the impact of the tradition. But standing at the grave of this man in Pittsburgh that day, right as the 6 were being buried in Israel, I felt tremendous compassion for this man's family who were unable to contain their grief. And at the very same time, I felt completely and inextricably connected to mourners in Zion and Jerusalem, to the families of those 6 murdered hostages. It has never been so clear to me. Hamakom yenachem etchem b'toch shar avlei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. May God comfort you together with all mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. That day, the formula I had been reciting for decades was all of a sudden resounding in my ears and in my heart in a new way, because I was seeing it play out before my eyes. Our pain links us to others in pain. Our grief is as personal as it is universal. I was reminded once again of how important it is to be in the presence of mourners, to witness and to hold their grief and to provide comfort. And frankly, it led me to consider once again just how far our compassion reaches. Can we find it in our hearts to extend that formula? Can we say, may God comfort you together with all mourners in Zion and Jerusalem, and then add, in every place where human beings mourn? And yet this year has tested us. It has tested those of us who hold fiercely to the notion that all humanity is connected. After the unspeakably grim and grisly attack on Israel last October 7th, we have watched a long and protracted and terrible war in Gaza. Here in the United States, we have experienced verbal and physical anti-Semitic attacks, including here in Pittsburgh, abandonment from those who have reliably been our allies, and for some, fear of articulating an opinion that might not track with a perceived norm. Some in the American Jewish community have responded to the brutality and the inhumanity of the attack on Israel in October with hatred, with fear, with vindictiveness, and with a constant and insidious comparison of us and them. It is understandable, and I understand. I do. But I'm here this morning to suggest another way, a way that I have tried to pursue, a way that was articulated by Rachel Goldberg Poland 2 months after her son Hirsch's capture. She wrote a poem which is just one big and generous act of compassion. I call this the Torah of the Goldberg-Poland family. It is a Torah, a holy teaching. I strive to honor and feel the need to share it with you. In this poem, Rachel Goldberg-Poland captures the kind of humanity that I aspire to. All I ask is that you consider this message. One Tiny Seed by Rachel Goldberg-Poland. There is a lullaby that says your mother will cry 1,000 tears before you grow to be a man. I have cried 1,000,000 tears in the last 67 days. We all have. And I know that way over there, there's another woman who looks just like me, because we are all so very similar, and she also has been crying. All those tears, a sea of tears, they all taste the same. Can we take them, gather them up, remove the salt, and pour them over our desert of despair and plant one tiny seed? A seed wrapped in fear, trauma, pain, war, and hope, and see what grows? Could it be that this woman, so very like me, that she and I could be sitting together in 50 years, laughing without teeth, because we have drunk so much sweet tea together? And now we are so very old, and our faces are creased like worn-out brown paper bags, and our sons have their own grandchildren, and our sons have long lives, one of them without an arm, but who needs 2 arms anyway? Is it all a dream? A fantasy? A prophecy? One tiny seed. The excruciating truth is that Rachel Goldberg-Poland wrote this poem on the 67th day of her child's captivity. He did not live. We do not know the fate of the other imagined son that she wrote about. But Rachel Goldberg-Poland understood that she and this other mother have the same story. She understood that there's no such thing as us and them. She understood that a mother's pain is a mother's pain. And all I ask is that you consider this idea. The traditional Torah portions for Rosh Hashanah are stories about 2 sons, Yitzchak, Isaac, who will become one of the patriarchs of the Jews, and Ishmael, who will become the ancestor of Muhammad, founder of Islam. In both narratives, the sons are in mortal danger, and in both cases, at the last minute, they are saved. The Torah portion for the first day that we just read focus on 2 outsiders in the community of Abraham and Sarah. Hagar, whose name literally translates to the stranger, is an enslaved woman who bears Abraham a son, Ishmael. The story of her banishment and the resultant danger she and Ishmael encounter seems to be written so that we identify with them, with the vulnerable ones, the strangers. In fact, Sir Jonathan Sacks, one of the most respected rabbis of this century, spoke about this portion at an ethics conference. He taught there is no way to read it without having sympathy. We identify not with the chosen, but with the rejected. He goes on to add that the story is intended to help us see the world through someone else's eyes, to see reality through the eyes of Ishmael and Hagar, and then to realize that they are human too, that they too are blessed by God, and when they cry, God hears. It is only when we can enter the mind of the other that we can save ourselves from inhumanity. The new year begins with this message. The lives and well-being of Hagar and Ishmael are as important as those of Sarah and Yitzchak. Today, this looks like understanding that the anguish Hirsch Goldberg-Poland's family feels upon his death is the same as the anguish a family in Gaza feels upon the death of one of their own. My state representative, Abigail Salisbury, a Jewish woman, posted this following the funerals of the 6 hostages. This is her. I want to talk about Palestinian suffering. My father used to like to say, it all depends on whose ox is being gored. I didn't really understand this saying as a child. It might be related to a biblical passage, but it basically means that you see things one way when they impact you, and another way when they impact someone else. She's still talking. By the way, she was at the Democratic National Convention. I cried when Hirsch's parents stood on the stage at the DNC. Why? Because I could put a specific face to the abstract concept of hostages, because his parents were right there in front of me and his mother was doubled over in grief? Perhaps. But was it mostly because he was one of my oxen? She continues. Somewhere out there is another mother who I've never met, whose face I've never seen, who is not Jewish or American. She is Palestinian. I don't know her son's name or what he looks like or anything about him. Her family wasn't on the DNC stage. She too is doubled over at grief and crying because her son also died. She and her son are not less valuable. Her grief is not less. He is not my ox. But he nonetheless deserves my compassion. This is still Abigail. In the district, I go to a disturbing number of memorials for children who have been killed. I went to one today. There is a sound I think about sometimes, a sound a mother made at the memorial for her son who was shot. It was a sound of a deep, boundless pain and agony. I cried so hard when I heard it that I had to leave the event because I was drawing attention to myself. I'd never heard anything like that before, and it cut right to my core. Sound is what I think about when I think about unnecessary killings and tragic deaths. The sound probably is the same no matter what language the mother speaks. She ends with, it shouldn't matter whose ox is being gored. And this is how I feel as well. There is only one change I would suggest to Representative Salisbury. Her first sentence reads, I want to talk about Palestinian suffering. My suggestion, I actually made it to her. I want to talk about human suffering. My instinct is to shy away from binaries. I don't love categories and labels, and us and them thinking feels confining and uncomfortable. Rather, what if we expanded our view, expanded our compassion to understand, as Rachel Goldberg-Polin did, that her pain connects her to that Palestinian mother? What if we expanded our view? What if we expanded our compassion, as Representative Salisbury hints, to understand that all oxen are ours? What if instead of comparisons between the number of Israelis killed and the number of Palestinians killed, we talked about the number of human beings who have lost their lives? Can we talk about all those who have suffered, who are homeless, who are in pain and mourning, and whose lives will never be the same? For many years here, we read the story of creation on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, and we will be reading it tomorrow at services with Temple Sinai. Reading the creation story on the first day of a new year calls us to think about the freshness and the possibility inherent in our own lives. We are hopeful today on the first day of the year. One verse in that creation narrative tells us that human beings, it doesn't specify what kind, it says all human beings are created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of the Holy One. In a beautiful article titled, What Kind of Religious Jew Am I? The Rachel and John Kind, author Michel Tzion writes that the moral compass of the Goldberg-Polins starts with Genesis, ethically bound to the infinitely valuable image of God imbued in all humans. They taught us that every human being is b'tselem Elohim, the image of God, a spark of holiness. Judaism teaches that we are ethically bound to the infinitely valuable image of God in all humans. When they suffer, we suffer. When they die, we grieve. On this first day of the new year, 5785, may we consider the thread that binds our own grief to the grief of people we have never met. May we understand that all human life is sacred and that pain is universal. Hamakom yenachem etchem b'toch she'avlei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. May God comfort us, together with all mourners of Zion and Jerusalem, and everywhere where human beings mourn. Shana Tova.